Chapter 3. From this day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, in the most comprehensive sense of the term, became nearly my sole occupation. I read with ardor those works, so full of genius and discrimination, which modern inquirers have written on those subjects. I attended the lectures, and I cultivated the acquaintance with the men of science in the university. And I found even that M. Kremke a great deal of sound sense and real information combined, it is true, with a repulsive physiognomy and manners, but not on the account the less valuable. In M. Waldman I found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged with dogmatism, and instructions were given with an air of frankness, that good nature that had banished every idea of pedantry. It was, perhaps, the amicable character of the man that inclined me more to that branch of natural philosophy which he professed, than an intrinsic love of science itself. But this state of mind had only placed the first steps towards knowledge. I more fully entered into the science, the more exclusively I pursued it for my own sake. The application, which at first had been a matter of duty and resolution, now became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. I was applied so closely, it may be easily conceived that I improved rapidly. My ardor was indeed an astonishment of the students, and my proficiency that of the masters. Professor Kremke often asked me, with a sly smile, how Cornelius Agrippa went on, whilst M. Waldman expressed the most heartfelt exultation in my progress. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was engaged, heart and soul, to the pursuits of some discoveries which I hoped to make. None but those who have experienced them can conceive the excitements of science. In other sciences you go as far as others have gone before you, and there is nothing more to know. But in a scientific pursuit of a continual food for discovery and wonder, a mind of moderate capacity which closely pursues one study must infallibly arrive at great proficiency in that study, and I, who continually sought attainments of one such object of pursuit, and was solely wrapped up in it, improved so rapidly that at the end of 2 years I made some discoveries in the improvement of some chemical instruments, which procured me a great esteem and admiration of the university. When I had arrived at this point, and had become well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy, as depended on the lessons of any of the professors at Ignosant, my residence there no longer being productive of my preference, I thought of returning to my friends in the native town, when an incident happened that protected my stay. One of the phenomena which had purely attracted my attention to the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life, whence I often asked myself the principle of life proceeded. It was a bold question, and one which has ever so considered to be a mystery, yet with how things we blink upon being acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not retain our inquiries. I revolved these circumstances in my mind, and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relates to physiology. Unless I had been animated by an almost supernatural enthusiasm, my application to the study would have been irksome and almost intolerable. To examine the causes of life, we must first recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken great precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not ever remember to have trembled at the tale of superstition, or have been feared the apparition of spirits. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely a receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. Now I was to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend my days and nights in vaults or channel houses. My attention was fixed upon every object and the unsupportable to the delicacy of human feelings. I saw how the fine form of a man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeed the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and the brain. I paused, examining and analyzing all the minutiae of constitution, as exemplified in the change from life to death and death to life, till from the midst of the darkness a sudden light broke upon me, a light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect which it illustrated, I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries toward the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens, which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. The astonishment which I had first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labor to arrive at once at the summit of my desires, was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. But this discovery was too great and overwhelming, that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld only the result. What had been the study and desire of the wisest men since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Not that, like this magic scene, it all opened upon me at once. The information I had obtained was of nature rather than direct endeavors, so soon as I should point them toward the object of my search, to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead, and found passage to life aided only by one glimmering, seemingly ineffectual light. I see by your eagerness, and the wonder and hope in your eyes expressed to my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I was then, with your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be in the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. When I found so astonishingly a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity for bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, all its intricacies and fibers and muscles and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one of a simpler organization. But my imagination was too much exalted for my first success to permit me the doubt of any ability to give life to an animal as complex and as wonderful as man. The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to the arduous undertaking. But I doubted not that I should be ultimately successful. I prepared myself for a multitude of reverses. My operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work might be imperfect. Yet when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mechanics, I had encouraged the hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations of future success. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as any arguments of its impracticality. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. As the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved, contrary to my first interaction, to make the being of a gigantic stature. That is to say, about 8 feet in height, and proportionally large. After having formed this determination and having spent some months successfully collecting and arranging my materials, I began. No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards, like a hurricane, in its first enthusiasm of science. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should break through first, then pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of a child so completely as I should desire theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might, in process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoured the body to consumption. These thoughts supported my spirits while I pursued my undertaking with unremitting ardor. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. Sometimes, on the very brink of certainty, I failed, yet I still clung to the hope on which the next day or the next hour might realize. One secret which I alone promised was the hope to which I had dedicated myself, and the moon gazed on my midnight labors, while, with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness, I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil, as I dabbled among the unfollowed damps of the grave, and tortured the living animal to animate its lifeless clay? My limbs now tremble, and my eyes swim with remembrance, but then a resistless, an almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul and sensation of my own pursuits. It was indeed but passing trance. They only made me feel with renewed acuteness so soon, the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate. I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from charnel houses, and disturbed, with profane fingers, the tremendous secrets of the human frame. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house, and separated from all the other apartments of the gallery and staircase, I kept working my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were staring from their sockets and attending to the details of my employment. The dissecting room and slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn to loathing for my occupation, while still urged on by my eagerness, which perpetually increased. I brought my work near to a conclusion. The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul in one pursuit. It was the most beautiful season. Never did fields bestow a more beautiful harvest, or the vines yield a more luxuriant vintage. But my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature, and the same feelings which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me to also forget those friends who were so many miles absent, and whom I had not seen for a long time. I knew my silence disquieted them, and I well remembered the words of my father. I know that while you are pleased with yourself, you will thank us with affection, and we shall hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard the interruption in your correspondence as a proof that your other duties are equally neglected. I knew well, therefore, what would be my father's feelings, but I could not tear my thoughts from my employment, loathsome in itself, but which had taken an irrepressible hold of my imagination. I wished, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to my feelings of affection until the great objects which swallowed up every habit of my nature should be completed. I then thought that my father would be unjust if he ascribed my negligence to vice, or faultiness on my part, but I am now convinced that he is justified in conceiving that I should not be altogether free from blame. The human being in perfection ought always be preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never to allow passion or a transitory desire to disturb this tranquillity. I do not think that the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections, and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix, then that study is certainly unlawful, that is to say, not befitting of a human mind. If this rule were always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with your tranquillity and domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved. Caesar would not have spared his country. America would not have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru would not have been destroyed. But I forget that I am moralizing the most interesting part of my tale, and your look reminds me to proceed. My father made no reproach in his letters, and only took notice of my silence in inquiring of my occupations, more particularly than before. Spring, winter, summer, all passed between my labors, but I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves, sights which always yielded me supreme delights, so deeply I was engrossed in my occupation. The leaves of that year had withered before my work drew near to a close, and now every day shewed me the more painfully how plain I had succeeded. But my enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety. It appeared rather like one doomed to slavery, to toil in the mines, or another unwholesome trade, than an artist occupied by his favorite enjoyments. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree, a disease I regretted the more because I had hitherto enjoyed the most excellent health, and had always boasted to the firmness of my nerves. But I believed that exercise and amusement would both soon drive away such symptoms, and I promised myself both of these when my creation would be complete.